The humidity hits you first. A thick, heavy dampness that smells like wet minerals, chilled iron, and old, cold ash. Your breath hitches as the temperature drops 15 degrees in a single step, the air turning stagnant and heavy against your skin. This is the sensory reality of the cave, a world that hasn't changed its basic character in over 1 million years. But if these stony cathedrals provided our ancestors with the ultimate climate control and the most durable fortress on the planet, why did we ever decide to walk out into the wind and the rain? Was it a choice driven by ambition, or were we evicted by the sheer physics of our own success? What if the caveman was never actually a biological reality, but an archaeological accident caused by what happened to survive the rot of time? Why does the image of the stoic Neanderthal, huddled by a cave fire, persist so strongly when the evidence suggests it was the exception rather than the rule? To understand why we stopped living in caves, we first have to ask a much more uncomfortable question. Did most of us ever really live in them to begin with? We have a massive sampling bias problem in human history. When an ancient family built a shelter out of mammoth hides, birchwood, or savanna grass, that structure disappeared within a few decades. The wood rotted, the hides were eaten by insects, and the grass was reclaimed by the earth. But when a family lived in a limestone cave, their discarded stone tools, their charcoal-stained hearths, and their own bones were shielded from the elements. The cave acted as a natural vault, a mineral-rich time capsule that preserved the records of human life while the open-air sites were being wiped clean by the mill of time. This creates a jackpot effect for archaeologists. We find a disproportionate amount of evidence in caves because that's where the evidence survives, not necessarily because that's where most people were. Research by archaeologists like Dr. Margaret Conkey has highlighted that for every cave site we find, there were likely dozens, if not hundreds, of open-air campsites that left no trace behind. This suggests that the departure from caves wasn't a sudden exodus, but rather the moment our alternative housing finally became durable enough to survive the historical record. The rocks were a lie of convenience. Why is it that even in regions where the mountains were riddled with perfect sheltering holes, the human population eventually decided that a pile of mud bricks was superior? The answer begins with a brutal lesson in geography and volume. Caves are not evenly distributed across the globe. They are geological anomalies. You need soluble rock like limestone or dolomite, specific water table conditions, and millions of years of erosion to create a space large enough for a human tribe. If your clan was living in the vast grasslands of the Serengeti or the lowest plains of Siberia, you didn't have a cave option. You were forced to innovate. But even for those lucky enough to have a cave nearby, they eventually hit a hard physical ceiling, the non-negotiable square footage of the mountain. A cave cannot grow. You cannot knock down a limestone wall to add a nursery or a storage room without risking a catastrophic structural collapse. As human social groups began to expand, the cave became a bottleneck. Studies on early human group sizes, often linked to Dunbar's number of roughly 150 individuals, suggest that most natural cave systems simply couldn't accommodate the booming populations of the late Paleolithic. If your tribe grew from 30 people to 80, you couldn't upgrade the cave. You were forced to split the group or move out. This physical limitation created a pressure cooker environment. Why stay in a cramped, dark, damp hole when you could build a settlement in the sun that could grow as large as your ambitions? Nature didn't offer an expansion pack. What happened to the human psyche when we realized that the ground beneath our feet was more valuable than the rock over our heads? Around 12,000 years ago, at the start of the Holocene, the world underwent a massive climatic shift. The glaciers retreated, and the era of agriculture began. This created a fundamental divorce between human needs and cave locations. You see, the specific geology that creates deep, livable cave systems, karst landscapes, rarely produces the kind of rich, silty, well-irrigated soil needed for large-scale farming. Farming requires floodplains and river valleys. It requires open space and direct sunlight. If you were a member of the Natufian culture in the Levant, one of the first groups to experiment with settled life, you faced a choice. Do you stay in the safety of the limestone cliffs and walk 6 miles every day to tend your wild grains, or do you build a permanent hut right in the middle of your fields? The fields won. Agriculture demanded proximity. It demanded that the farmer live where the food grew. This transition shifted our priority from protection from the elements to access to resources. We didn't just leave the caves, we were lured away by the promise of a stable food supply. But this move came with a hidden cost. By leaving the caves, we lost the natural insulation of the earth. We had to learn how to manufacture our own climate, which led to the first great innovations in architecture. If the mountain wouldn't follow us to the river, we would have to learn how to build a mountain of our own. The soil dictated the move. Could the very air our ancestors breathed inside those caves have been the silent killer that drove them toward the exit? We often romanticize the hearth fire in a cave, but the reality was likely a respiratory nightmare. Caves have notoriously poor ventilation. Even a large cavern can become a trap for particulate matter, carbon monoxide, and smoke once you have a sustained fire going for cooking and warmth. Archaeologists excavating sites like the Kesem Cave in Israel have found deep layers of ash and micro-residues that suggest long-term occupants were living in a constant haze of wood smoke. Modern studies on cave lung, a prehistoric version of the health issues found in people who use indoor biomass stoves today, suggest that life inside a cave was incredibly hard on the human respiratory system. In a hut or a tent, smoke can escape through a hole in the roof or through the gaps in the fabric. In a limestone cave, the smoke hits the ceiling, cools, and lingers. This wouldn't just have been uncomfortable. It would have been lethal over time, particularly for the very young and the very old. As our ancestors spent more time around fires, using them for everything from tool-making to storytelling, the smoke-filled environment of the cave became less of a sanctuary and more of a hazard. Did we leave because we simply wanted to breathe? Or was it the realization that the stable temperature of a cave wasn't worth the cost of a chronic cough and a shortened lifespan? Fresh air was a luxury the mountain couldn't provide. Why did the concept of mine and yours make the communal life of a cave increasingly impossible to maintain? As humans moved from a nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle towards something more settled, our social structures became more complex and more hierarchical. A cave is, by its nature, a communal space. It is one big room where everyone sees, hears, and smells everyone else. This works well for a small, egalitarian band of hunters, but it fails miserably for a society that is starting to value private property, specialized labor, and social status. When you start accumulating grain, specialized tools, and prestige items, you want a way to secure them. You want a door you can close. You want a space that belongs specifically to your family unit. Excavations at early Neolithic sites like Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey show a radical shift in how humans organized space. These weren't just shelters, they were individual cells of private ownership, often entered through the roof to maximize security and interior wall space. You can't easily subdivide a cave into individual apartments with locked doors without immense effort. By building our own homes, we gained the ability to express our social identity and protect our individual wealth. Was the move out of the cave actually our first step toward the invention of the suburb? Did we trade the communal warmth of the cave for the isolated security of the four-walled room because we were tired of sharing everything? Privacy killed the cavern. If the cave offered the perfect natural defense against predators and rival tribes, what technology could possibly be strong enough to replace it? The answer lies in the invention of the artificial cave, the mud brick. For a long time, the primary advantage of a cave was that it was indestructible. You couldn't burn it down, and a predator couldn't dig through the walls. But around 10,000 years ago, humans mastered the art of taking common dirt, mixing it with straw and water, and baking it in the sun. This was a revolutionary leap in engineering. Mud brick houses, especially when clustered together in a beehive arrangement, offered many of the same benefits as a cave. They had high thermal mass, meaning they stayed cool in the day and warm at night, and they were surprisingly durable. But unlike a cave, they could be built anywhere. We see this at sites like Jericho, where some of the earliest permanent stone and mud brick structures were built. Once we could replicate the stone experience using materials found in a riverbed, the geographic hold the mountains had on us was broken. We became the masters of our environment rather than its tenants. But this independence brought a new set of problems. A mud brick house requires constant maintenance. It can melt in a flood. It can be breached by a determined enemy. Why did we decide that the constant labor of home ownership was better than the rent-free life of a cave? Was it simply because a built home allowed for something the cave never could? Natural light? The sun was a powerful motivator. Why does the interior of a cave feel so fundamentally dead compared to even the simplest human hut? It's the light, or rather the total, crushing lack of it. Outside of the twilight zone near the entrance, a cave is a place of absolute darkness. To do anything, to make a spear, to scrape a hide, to prepare food, you needed a constant, fuel-hungry light source. This meant that for ancient humans, a significant portion of their living space was functionally useless unless they were willing to burn through their precious supplies of wood or animal fat. When humans began building their own structures, they could orient them toward the sun. They could include openings that allowed the light to flood in, extending the productive hours of the day. This wasn't just a matter of convenience, it was an economic revolution. More light meant more time for innovation, more time for art, and more time for social bonding. If you look at the cave paintings of Lascaux or Altamira, they are located in deep, inaccessible galleries that would have been pitch black. This suggests that the caves were already being relegated to specialized ritualistic use, while the real living happened in the light. Did we stop living in caves because we were tired of living in the dark, or was it because we realized that the monsters in the shadows were just our own fears, and we no longer needed a stone fortress to hide from them? The darkness was a tax on human potential. How did the realization that caves were active geological features change our relationship with them? We tend to think of a cave as a static, unchanging thing, but they are actually dynamic environments. They flood, they breathe, they collapse. Many of the world's most famous cave systems, like those in the Dordogne region of France, show evidence of massive seasonal flooding. A sudden heavy rainstorm miles away could cause the water table to rise, turning a cozy bedroom into a drowning trap within minutes. Geologist Dr. Chris Stringer and other researchers have noted that many occupied caves were likely only used seasonally. They were winter retreats or summer cooling stations, not permanent year-round residences. The risk of rockfalls was also a constant, terrifying reality. We found Neanderthal remains, like the famous Shanidar 1 individual, who lived through incredible trauma, but others weren't so lucky, ending up buried under ceiling collapses. As we became more domesticated, our tolerance for this kind of unpredictable environmental risk dropped. A house that you built yourself was a house you understood. You knew the strength of the beams. You knew the pitch of the roof. The cave, however, was an alien entity whose rules were written in the deep time of the earth, and those rules didn't always favor human survival. The mountain didn't care if you were sleeping. What if the most dangerous thing about a cave wasn't the darkness or the smoke, but the things that had lived there long before we arrived? Humans were never the only ones looking for a good cave. We were in direct, often violent competition with megafauna like the cave bear, Ursus spelaeus, and the cave hyena. These weren't just animals passing through, they were specialist species that had evolved specifically to occupy the same real estate we wanted. Excavations at sites like the Divya Babe Cave in Slovenia have found thousands of cave bear bones intermingled with human artifacts. This suggests a grim cycle of squatting. The bears would hibernate in the cave, the humans would move in during the summer and kill any remaining bears, and then the cycle would repeat. It was a high-stakes, bloody game of musical chairs. As human populations became more settled and less focused on high-risk hunting, the appeal of fighting a 1,000-pound bear for a drafty bedroom started to wane. By building our own shelters in the open, we removed ourselves from the bear's backyard. We created a buffer zone between us and the wild. Why deal with a cave bear when you could build a wooden fence that the bear had no interest in crossing? The neighbors were too much to handle. How did the invention of the household finally seal the door on our cave-dwelling past? By the time we reached the late Neolithic and the early Bronze Age, the human home had become more than just a shelter. It was a machine for living. We had indoor hearths with chimneys. We had separate areas for sleeping, cooking, and working. We had storage pits for surplus food and pens for domesticated animals. A cave is a take-it-or-leave-it space. You have to adapt your life to the shape of the rock. A house is the opposite. The space adapts to you. This shift in agency, from being a tenant of nature to being the architect of our own reality, is perhaps the real reason we left. We didn't stop living in caves because they were bad shelters. We stopped because they were inflexible shelters. We had outgrown the mountain's ability to provide for us. Our societies had become too loud, too large, too dirty, and too complex for the silent, stagnant halls of the earth. We needed more room, more light, and more control. When we stepped out of the cave for the last time, we weren't just looking for a new place to sleep. We were looking for a way to rewrite the rules of what it meant to be human. But did we ever really leave, or did we just start building caves out of different materials? Steel and glass, or just newer versions of the same old walls? Why is it that even today, the idea of the cave still holds such a powerful, almost magnetic pull on our collective imagination? Is it a lingering ancestral memory of safety, or is it a reminder of a time when we were more connected to the pulse of the planet? The truth is, we didn't abandon caves in a single dramatic moment. It was a long, slow fade, a 1,000-year-long sunset. Even into the Middle Ages and beyond, people in places like the Loire Valley in France or the Cappadocia region in Turkey continued to carve homes into soft volcanic rock. In some parts of the world, people still live in troglodyte communities today, enjoying the natural insulation and low-carbon footprint that their ancestors discovered a million years ago. But for the vast majority of our species, the cave became a symbol of a past we wanted to move beyond. It became primitive, a word we use to distance ourselves from the raw, unpolished reality of our origins. We traded the eternal, unchanging limestone for the fragile, temporary comfort of the built world. We chose the wind and the sun over the damp and the dark. But in doing so, we also inherited the responsibility of maintenance. We became the guardians of our own survival, responsible for every roof that leaks and every wall that cracks. The mountain didn't need us to take care of it. If you look at the trajectory of human history, the exit from the cave was our first great act of defiance against the limitations of the natural world. It was the moment we decided that good enough wasn't enough. We wanted a world that was shaped by our hands, not just a world we had to fit into. We left the caves because we were ready to grow up, to face the elements on our own terms, and to see what we could build in the wide open spaces of the earth. We traded the certainty of the rock for the possibility of the horizon. But as you sit in your climate-controlled room today, shielded by walls of drywall and floors of engineered wood, ask yourself, how far have you actually gone? You are still seeking the same things your ancestors sought in the limestone cliffs of the Dordogne. You want a stable temperature. You want a sense of security. You want a place where your family is safe from the things that go bump in the night. You've just traded the geological lottery for a 30-year mortgage. The cave didn't change, we did. And the moment we realized we could create our own safety was the moment the cave became nothing more than a memory, a dusty museum of who we used to be before we decided to become the masters of the world. The mountain is still there, waiting in the dark. It doesn't mind that you left. It has all the time in the world to wait for the next tenant to realize that the open air isn't nearly as stable as it looks. But for now, the sun is out, the fields are calling, and we have too much to build to ever think about going back inside. What if the biggest myth isn't that we used to live in caves, but that we ever actually stopped needing the feeling they gave us? We've spent the last 10,000 years trying to replicate that feeling of absolute stony silence in a world that is increasingly loud and fragile. We've built man caves, soundproofed apartments, and underground bunkers, all in an attempt to buy back the peace of mind our ancestors got for free. We left the cave to conquer the world, but we've spent every moment since trying to figure out how to take that sense of shelter with us. Is the modern house just a cave with better plumbing and a higher price tag? Do you really feel any safer behind your locked door than a Neanderthal did behind a pile of thorn bushes at a cave entrance? We like to think of history as a straight line of progress, but sometimes it's a circle. We left the rock to find the sun, but now we use the sun to power the machines that keep our indoor caves at a perfect 68 degrees. We are the same creatures, driven by the same fears, just using more expensive tools to hide from them. The next time you walk into a basement or a parking garage and feel that sudden drop in temperature, that familiar smell of damp concrete and stagnant air, pay attention to that little shiver in your spine. That's not just a physical reaction to the cold. That's 100,000 years of history reminding you where you came from. It's a whisper from the limestone, telling you that the mountain still remembers your name, even if you've forgotten the way back. But you haven't forgotten, have you? You've just gotten better at hiding it. You've replaced the cave with the cubicle, the fire with the glowing screen, and the cave bear with the rising cost of living. The environment has changed, but the struggle for space, security, and a decent night's sleep remains exactly the same. You aren't a post-cave human. You are just a human who has learned how to carry your cave with you wherever you go. If this deep dive into our stony origins made you look at your own four walls a little differently, why not stick around for the next investigation? We're constantly peeling back the layers of the things we take for granted, from the hidden physics of ancient cities to the psychological quirks that still drive our modern lives. Hit that subscribe button and join the conversation. Do you think we lost something vital when we walked out of the mountain, or was the trade-off for light and air the best deal we ever made? Tell us what your modern cave looks like in the comments. We actually read them. The reality is that your house is just a temporary pile of materials waiting to return to the earth, while the caves are still standing exactly where we left them. You don't live in a permanent structure. You live in a brief pause between the mountain and the dust.